We shall move to questions without notice, and I call the Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I inform the House the Minister for Indigenous Australians will be absent from question time today. She's visiting a remote community, and the Attorney-General will answer questions on her behalf. The Minister for Skills and Training will also be absent from question time today, and the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations will answer questions on his behalf.
I give the call to the Leader of the Nationals.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister commit to preferencing Green candidates last in every electorate at the next election?
Order. Give the call. Order. There is some difficulties with just the Leader of the Opposition will cease just under the standing orders and practice. It has been normal that operations of the party can't be answered, but if the Prime Minister wishes to answer the question, he can. Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. You've hinted in your ruling there what my answer will be, Mr Speaker, which is that those matters are all matters for the organisation of the party that we went through, but we certainly won't be taking lectures from the mob who want to preference one nation.
Order. The House comes to order. I'll hear from the member for Hawke.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. Why is engagement in our region important for a stable and prosperous Indo-Pacific, and how is the Albanese Labor government contributing to this?
The call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence.
Can I thank the member for his question? Last weekend, at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, I met with Lloyd Austin, the United States Secretary of Defence, and I remarked to Lloyd that in the last 2 years of all my counterparts, he is the one with whom I have met easily the most. Now, at one level, that's unsurprising, given the significance to Australia of America as our ally, but when you consider that I would be just one of many defence ministers around the world who would make the same observation, it says a lot about America's continuing presence, about the remarkable role which Lloyd Austin is personally playing, and about the impressive way in which the Biden administration is managing America's place in the world. Now, today we commemorate the 80th anniversary of D-Day, the most momentous day in the entire history of human warfare. And on that day, Australians and Americans stood side by side, as we have in every conflict since the First World War. In April of 1945, we also stood side by side as Australia sent a delegation led by Frank Ford and Doc Evatt to the Peace Conference in San Francisco, which established the United Nations. Having endured the greatest calamity ever, this meeting, one of the most important meetings of all time, was underpinned by an abiding commitment that in the future disputes between nations should be resolved not by reference to might and power, but by reference to a set of rules, the global rules-based order. And since then, as we have stood with America in conflict, so too we have stood with them and others as guardians and protectors of this global rules-based order. And in Singapore on the weekend, this was the topic, because the global rules-based order today is under more pressure than it has been at any point since the end of the Second World War. And so in all our meetings with the United States, with our partners in ASEAN, with Japan and Korea, with our friends in NATO and with China as well, our message was clear and simple. The global rules-based order remains today, as it was imagined in 1945, the greatest hope for enduring human security, because the global rules-based order provides full sovereignty to all nations, large and small, not just great powers. The global rules-based order is at the heart of Australia's strategic interest, and the maintenance of this order must continue to be the single most important contribution that all of us make to global peace.
On indulgence, the member for Canning.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for the update from the weekend. Unlike the Greens, the Labor Party and the Coalition share a common belief in our relationship with the US, and we're going to work together to uphold it. So I thank the Deputy Prime Minister.
Order. The member for Riverina, just remind the member for Canning, it's not necessary to add partisan remarks on indulgence. Give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, given the anti-Semitic conduct of the Greens political party and the Prime Minister's justified condemnation of them yesterday, will the Prime Minister rule out governing with the support of the Greens?
Once again, the form and content of the question is bordering on a hypothetical, but Prime Minister is entitled. Order. Order. Members on my left, members on my right will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister has the call.
I'm reminded of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and what the meaning of life is. In this case, the meaning of life is 78, which is how many members that we have over this side. We seek majority government. I said very clearly and consistently so.
Order. Members on my right, the Leader of the Opposition is entitled to raise a point of order, and he shall do so.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And it is on relevance. The fact is, Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister was asked a very direct question. It's time to show the Australian people whether he's got any backbone.
Order. Order. Members on my right will cease interjecting. The Chief Government Whip will cease interjecting. The Leader of the Opposition has raised his point of order. 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 Okay. I'm just going to wait. We're 20 seconds into the answer. Just for a reminder, for probably the 10th time this fortnight, extra statements should not be made in the point of order. Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. He's very angry, the Leader of the Opposition. And perhaps he's angry because one by one there's people who were sitting there who go and sit up the back there. One by one he loses people. He lost the member for Calare. He's lost the member for Monash up there. Holly Hughes, of course, Senator Hughes, he lost last week. The one thing that people facing pre-selections in the Liberal Party hope for is that they don't get endorsed by this bloke. Because in the previous Senate pre-selection there were 3 candidates, he endorsed 2 of them, and the only one that got up, was the one he didn't endorse, Mr Speaker. And now he sits in the Senate. Mr Speaker, we seek, as the Australian Labor Party, to govern by ourselves. We don't and aren't part of a coalition. You are. You are. The only coalition party in this here is the Liberal Party with the National Party, who, when they were last in government, refused to publish the deal between the Liberal Party and the National Party, having that tail wagging the Liberal Party dog. The Australian Labor Party proudly does not govern in coalition with any political party, nor will we in the future, Mr Speaker, nor will we in the future. And today, indeed, I was there launching or asking our candidate in Sturt. I was there this morning in St Peters, Mr Speaker, and over coming weeks we'll be rolling out candidates, who will take their place on the government benches after the election.
Order. When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the order. 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 The member for Barker, the Leader of the Opposition and the Prime Minister will cease their conversation. Order, and members on the front bench will also cease their contribution so I can hear from the member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government's budget right for the economic conditions and helping ease cost of living pressures for Australians, and what approaches were rejected?
Give the call. Order. We'll give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the wonderful member for Corangamite for her question. The member for Corangamite understands how important it is that we give a tax cut for every taxpayer in her community and right around the country, and that we provide energy bill relief to every household in her electorate and right around Australia, Mr Speaker. The national accounts yesterday were confirmation that the economy is soft and that people are under pressure. We saw it in the savings numbers, we saw it in the consumption figures, we saw it in the impact of rents and the impact of rate rises in our economy and on household budgets, Mr Speaker. Now, these are the conditions that we anticipated in the budget, because we don't just acknowledge and understand that times are tough for too many people, we're actually doing something about it in the budget. And the primary way that we're doing that is with our cost of living relief, tax cut for every taxpayer, energy bill relief for every household, cheaper medicines, getting wages moving again, help with rent and with student debt as well, Mr Speaker. At the same time as we make really important investments in housing, in skills and in the industries which will power the future in the context of the global net zero transformation. All at the same time as we repair the budget. We turn big Liberal deficits into Labor surpluses and pay down the debt that we inherited from those opposite when we came to office. So our approach, Mr Speaker, is responsible, it is methodical, it is considered and it is calibrated. And we reject a lot of the free advice that we got around budget time that we should have slashed and burned in the budget when the economy was already weak and when people were already under enough pressure. And we reject as well the chaotic and catastrophic approach which was pitched up by those opposite, Mr Speaker. We know that they didn't want everyone to get a tax cut because they called for an election over it. We know that they don't want people to get energy bill relief because last time they voted against it, Mr Speaker. They described the indexation of the age pension as overspending in the budget, Mr Speaker. They called for the type of slashing and burning in the budget which would have smashed the economy and left people to fend for themselves at a time of extreme pressure. They have proven again and again, before, during and after the budget reply, that their nasty negativity is no substitute for economic credibility, Mr Speaker. Now, in these difficult circumstances, the best thing to do is to provide cost of living relief in the most responsible way, invest in housing and skills and industry, and repair the budget without smashing the economy. And that's what our budget is all about. And the national accounts showed again why that's so important and why the approach that we are taking in the budget and in our economic strategy is exactly right for the challenging circumstances that we all confront.
Before I call the next questioner, I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today and advised by the member for Hawke is His Excellency Mr Ufuk Cüzar, the Ambassador of the Republic of Turkey to Australia. A warm welcome to question time. Give the call to the honourable member for Griffith.
To the Prime Minister, this year Labor awarded a $917 million contract to Israel Weapons Corporation, Elbit Systems, the same company that made the drone that Israel used to bomb the World Central Kitchen convoy and kill Australian aid worker Zomi Frankham. Elbit is one of the largest suppliers to the Israeli military as it carries out a genocide in Gaza. Elbit Systems is already blacklisted in other countries for violations of humanitarian law. Why won't the government cancel the Elbit Systems contract?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question. It is a fact that there have been no weapons or ammunition exported to Israel in the last 5 years. That information was confirmed in Senate estimates. Just this week, Defence officials confirmed that recent data published by DFAT referring to the export of arms to Israel in February refers to the export of a single item for the Australian Defence Force that will return to Australia once it's fixed, disproving the misinformation being peddled by yourself. At that time, it is a fact that defence export permits that were issued to Israel over the last 5 years is for items other than weapons and ammunition, such as components of ADF equipment, which is being repaired. Now, the export permits, of course, should not be confused with weapons sales. But I suspect the member knows this. I suspect the member knows this. Because...
Order. The Prime Minister will pause. The member for Griffith on a point of order.
Thanks, Speaker. On relevance, the Prime Minister was asked specifically about the Elbit Systems contract, the $917 million one that this government has awarded, and he has not mentioned it once. Not once. It is not his answer is not relevant to the question.
Resume your seat. Order. Just want to hear from the Leader of the House.
Point of order. The misinformation actually continues in the point of order. The question was much broader than that and was asked on television. People heard the question was much broader than that, and the Prime Minister is being relevant.
I can appreciate that the member for Griffith would like a specific part or part of the question answered, but under the standing orders, the Prime Minister needs to be directly relevant. He is talking about the relevant topic, and under the standing orders, he has been directed, so he is in order. The Prime Minister has the call.
I am pleased to state that permits are required, export permits are required for a wide range of goods and technology, many for civilian and commercial purposes, and they're listed publicly on the Defence and Strategic Goods list. But, Mr Speaker, it is beyond my comprehension why anyone in this place would seek to suggest that Australia were participants in a conflict when we are not. When we are simply not. When we are simply not. When we have called for repeatedly for ceasefire. When we, the member says about the F-35 program. Well, Australia first engaged in it in 2002. Australia is one of 18 like-minded nations, including Norway, Denmark, Canada and the Netherlands, who operate the F-35 and contribute to its global supply chain. They know that that is the case as well, Mr Speaker, that they seek in a divisive way to raise these issues in order to then weaponise them and cause division in the Australian community. I ask the Assistant Minister to respond as well.
Thank you.
The Minister for Defence Industry.
Mr Prime Minister. And in fact, the misinformation continues in the question. Hanwha does not have that contract with the Government of Australia.
The Minister's time has concluded. Order. The Minister's time has concluded. We'll move to the next question. Order. Give the call to the honourable member for Chisholm.
Thank you so much, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering on its commitment to cheaper medicines? After a decade of cuts and neglect to Medicare, how will this help deliver cost-of-living relief for Australians?
The call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Chisholm because 2 years ago the member for Chisholm promised her community that we would make medicines cheaper, and over the past 2 years we've been busy delivering on that promise. In just the first 3 months of government, Mr Speaker, we slashed the maximum amount that millions of pensioners would pay for their medicines across a given year by 25%. In the first 12 months, we delivered the biggest cut to the price of medicines in the 75-year history of the PBS, a cut that saves general patients more than $20 million each and every month, Mr Speaker. In our first 18 months, we finally allowed doctors to prescribe common medicines for chronic disease for 60 days rather than just 30, saving patients lots of time and even more money, Mr Speaker. And in our first 24 months, Mr Speaker, we've made more than 200 new and amended listings to the PBS, giving Australian patients access to the world's best treatments at affordable PBS prices, Mr Speaker. And those listings include 3 high-cost listings included in the Treasurer's budget last month, like Camzyos, Mr Speaker, which is a new treatment for hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a condition that thickens the heart muscles, blocks blood flow, causing chest pain, shortness of breath and swelling right through the body, Mr Speaker. One patient, Dion, told us that this condition made it impossible for her to exercise and made it struggling even to take her dog for a walk. But after taking Camzyos, Mr Speaker, Dion told us, "I've got my life back." And after the Treasurer's listing, almost 4,000 patients every year will get their life back. And instead of paying $30,000 for this treatment, they'll just pay PBS prices, Mr Speaker. And PBS prices under this budget as well will be frozen for up to 5 years as part of the agreement that I signed earlier this week with the Pharmacy Guild and in legislation that I introduced into the House of Representatives this morning, Mr Speaker. Now, this just the latest cheaper medicines measure alone will save patients almost $500 million in co-payments over the next 5 years, Mr Speaker. And we know on this side cheaper medicines aren't just good for the hip pocket, although they obviously are. They're also good for your health because we know they make it much more likely that people will take the medicines that they need, Mr Speaker, which is why it's so hard to comprehend how the Leader of the Opposition can justify him trying to jack up the price of medicines by up to $5 a script in his horror health budget he delivered 10 years ago, almost to the day, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition tried to make medicines dearer. We're busy making them cheaper.
Call the member for Hume.
My question is to the Treasurer. The Albanese Labor government has weakened the economy and hurt families and small businesses with its economic decisions. The Treasurer has said the collapse in economic growth, combined with rising core inflation, is part of a perfectly calibrated plan. If a 5-quarter GDP per capita recession is part of a perfect plan, what economic failure is next in the Treasurer's plan?
The call to the Treasurer.
Well, Mr Speaker, I said that the current economic conditions justify the position that we've taken in the budget, and I stand by that, Mr Speaker, and I gave a detailed answer a moment ago about why that's the case, and I'm happy to repeat the main points that I made earlier on, and that is if we'd followed the advice of those opposite, hundreds of billions of dollars of cuts, that would have been diabolical for the conditions that people are confronting right now, a soft economy and people who are under pressure. And I tell you what, Mr Speaker, I won't be taking lectures from the people who left us more than $1 trillion of Liberal debt with almost nothing to show for it. And I won't be taking lectures from the poster child of waste and rorts in the budget that we were left to clean up. And I won't be taking lectures from those opposite who left us inflation with a 6 in front of it and it now has a 3 in front of it.
Treasurer will pause. The member for Hume is going to make a point of order, and I think I know what it is.
Yep. Mr Speaker, this question was specifically about his failed plan.
Order. The Treasurer may wish to defend his plan, and that may involve some comparing and contrast about what his plan is. But yes, I'm trying to help you help me. Okay. So the Treasurer cannot wade into alternative approaches or alternative policies. So we're just going to make sure he's had that point, and now he's got 2 minutes left to address the remaining parts of the question.
Yeah, Mr Speaker, we don't want to get that heavily rehearsed pointy finger again from the Shadow Treasurer. Mr Speaker, the point that I'm making is if the Shadow Treasurer is angry about inflation with a 3 in front of it, he must be filthy about inflation with a 6 in front of it, which is what we inherited from those opposite. And he wants to talk about managing the budget, then he should be honest enough to tell the Australian people from the dispatch box that the cumulative bottom lines in the budget are $215 billion better as a consequence of our economic management, Mr Speaker. And he should tell the Australian people about the $80 billion of debt interest that we're avoiding because we're paying down the Liberal debt that we inherited. And he should be honest and say that inflation now is almost half what we inherited when he was a cabinet minister in the Morrison government, Mr Speaker. And so we are under no illusions about the conditions in the economy right now. We've been very upfront about the weakness in the economy, the softness in the economy laid bare by yesterday's national accounts. And we know that people are under pressure as well. But more than acknowledge that and more than understand that, we're acting on it. And we're acting on it despite the kind of nasty negativity and reflexive opposition that we hear from those opposite. I mean, if those opposite were fair income, they'd come to the dispatch box and they'd say to all those millions of Australians who are getting a tax cut because of us that they'd rather that people didn't get it. And they'd come to the dispatch box and they'd say they don't think people should get energy bill relief or help with their rent or cheaper medicines and all the other things that they opposed, Mr Speaker. And so the point that I made, and I come back very specifically to the question that the Shadow Treasurer asked, the point that I made is that if you factor in the conditions that exist in the economy right now, in the national economy, but indeed in household budgets as well, then the approach that we're taking is very important, and it is calibrated for the conditions that people are facing and the pressures that they're under. The cost of living pressures and other pressures as well. And our responsible economic management is getting the budget in better nick, providing cost of living help, and investing in the future, all of the things that they failed to do when they were in government.
Time has concluded. Give the call to the honourable member for Swan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering on cost of living relief without adding to inflation? And how does our economy compare to other G7 nations?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Swan for her question. Indeed, we are taking action on the cost of living because that is our #1 priority, and the recent budget showed that. And I'm glad that we get some questions about the economy, and budget, of course, is the focus on this side of the House. On July 1, in less than a month now, there will be lower taxes for every single Australian taxpayer. All 13.6 million of them, not just some. $300 in power bill relief for every single household and more for small businesses. Stronger Medicare in every community with a new 29 urgent care clinics being added to our 58 that we have already opened. More homes in every part of the country with our $32 billion Homes for Australia plan. A better deal for every working parent with superannuation on paid parental leave. And, of course, HECS relief, wiping $3 billion of student debt, as well as help for people who are rentals, the first back-to-back increase in Commonwealth rent assistance in more than 30 years. We're making these responsible decisions to fight inflation, investing in our skills, our energy security and our supply chains, and, of course, delivering the second consecutive budget surplus, the first time that has happened in nearly 2 decades. Comes on the back of the cost of living relief we provided in our first 2 years. Cheaper childcare, energy bill relief, cheaper medicines that have saved $370 million. Now, I'm asked of how this compares with the major economies around the world, the G7 countries. Australia has faster economic growth than Canada, Germany, Italy, Japan and the United Kingdom. We have a lower unemployment rate than Canada, France, Italy and the United Kingdom. We have faster employment growth than Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the US and the UK. We have a higher participation rate than Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the US and the UK. And, of course, Australia has a budget which is in surplus, unlike every single G7 country, and we have the smallest gross debt. This is all a direct result of the conscious decisions that we have made to make sure we provide that cost of living relief while continuing to put that downward pressure on inflation, whilst also planning for future growth through our Future Made in Australia plan.
Give the call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Treasurer. Labor has weakened the economy, hurting families and small businesses with its economic decisions. Yesterday's national accounts show Australia has been in a GDP per capita recession for the last 5 quarters. Business owner Stuart Knox told 10 News that if the GFC was 10 out of 10, this is 20 out of 20. This is as tough as I've ever seen it. Does the Treasurer seriously believe that business owners like Stuart are wrong and his economic plan is right?
Give a call to the Treasurer.
Well, it's gutsy to ask a question about Stuart and small business when they voted against helping small businesses with their energy bills. And if you really cared about Stuart and his small business, you wouldn't have done that, Mr Speaker. They wouldn't have done that. And so I think people see through these sorts of questions from those opposite. Those opposite couldn't give a stuff about people who are doing it tough, Mr Speaker. If they had their way, inflation would be higher and growth would be weaker and the budget would be in worse nick, Mr Speaker. Now, I say to Stuart, I say to the small business people of this country, I say to families and pensioners right around Australia, that we recognise that the economy is soft and that times are tough, but more than that, we're responding in the budget with cost of living relief and support for small business, Mr Speaker. And I'm asked about small business, and it's a perfect opportunity to tell everybody here and everybody who might be tuning in at home, Mr Speaker, that every time in the Senate that those opposite have had the opportunity to vote for tax breaks for small business, they've been voting against it. They've been voting against it. And, Mr Speaker, the thing about that which makes it particularly comical from their point of view is on the same day that the Leader of the Opposition was giving his budget reply, talking about support for small business, they were in the Senate voting against helping small business by providing them a tax break, Mr Speaker. This is the kind of chaos and confusion and hypocrisy that we hear from those opposite on a daily basis, Mr Speaker.
The Treasurer will pause so I can hear from the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
And the question did not invite the Treasurer to talk continually about the opposition, but to answer the question about his economic plan and the small business that I mentioned.
The member for Paterson will leave the chamber under 94A. It is highly disorderly. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition is entitled to raise her point of order. She'll be heard in silence, and if I'm dealing with a point of order, trust me, that is not the time to deal with a point of order. So the question did regard the national accounts, the policy on small business and, in particular, an individual and some ratings, yes, about the small business. So we're just going to ask the Treasurer to return to the question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As I understand it, I was asked what I would say to Stuart, and what I would say to Stuart is that we understand that the economy is soft right now. We've said that on a number of occasions, even before this week's national accounts, and that's why we're responding in the way that we are in the budget. I'd say to Stuart that if he wants the parliament to support small business, then he should tell those opposite to vote for small business in the Senate when they're given that opportunity. And I'd say to Stuart, I'd remind Stuart that when it came time to support small business with energy bill relief, this side of the House voted for it and that side of the House voted against it. I'd say to Stuart that the approach put forward by those opposite to slash and burn in the budget would be diabolical for small business in this country. We are managing the economy in a responsible and a considered and a methodical way, which is conscious of the conditions that small business and the broader Australian community confront right now. You can't say that for those opposite.
Call to the honourable member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government. Minister, how is the Albanese Labor government's budget providing cost-of-living relief to regional Australians, and why this is so important, and what has been the response?
Give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Lingiari for her question and the great advocacy work she does in making sure that we spend and invest in infrastructure, particularly in the Northern Territory and in remote communities where we are spending hundreds of millions of dollars to build the infrastructure that the Northern Territory needs. As members from regional Australia, we do understand that people in our regions and across the country are under pressure at the moment. It is why the government's priority has been cost of living relief for Australians. It's why our budget is carefully designed to deliver cost of living relief, of course, without adding to inflation. In just under a month, every single Australian taxpayer will receive a tax cut, putting more money back into their pockets. An apprentice in Bendigo on $53,000 a year will receive a tax cut of $1,000. A truckie in the Pilbara earning $77,000 a year will get a tax cut of $1,604, and a nurse in Tamworth earning $73,000 a year will get a tax cut of $1,504. And just like every taxpayer is getting a tax cut, from the 1st of July, every household will get energy relief. All households in regional Australia will see a $300 credit automatically applied to their electricity bill, and small businesses, something that those opposite might want to show some interest in the regions, will receive $325 off their bills over 2024. From cheaper medicines to HECS debt relief, we are helping regional Australians earn more and keep more of what they earn. But also there are our historic increases of funding to local councils for road safety and local road maintenance that will help ease pressure on ratepayers throughout the regions. We are increasing the Roads to Recovery funding from $500 million to $1 billion, something those opposite never did in a decade. It is a baked-in, permanent increase to every single council, not just elected councils on a coloured-coded spreadsheet, but every single council across the country. It will ensure that local councils across our regions can increase their investment in local road infrastructure and easing the financial burden on ratepayers. And the reaction has been pretty good. Bellingen Shire Council said, "The assurance of a permanent increase enables us to plan effectively and execute projects with greatest foresight, free from the constraints of budget fluctuations." Temora Shire Council, "This funding is a significant contribution to the enhancement and maintenance of our roads and will have a positive impact on our community." Wyndham in the East Kimberley says this funding is crucial to enhancing the safety and quality of our local roads. While on this side of the House we're supporting regional Australia, these opposite are doing that.
Member for Barker is going to cease interjecting. Give the call to Member Deakin.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the NDIS and Government Services. The Minister designed the NDIS and has been responsible Minister for over 2 years. Is it still possible for taxpayers' money to be spent through the NDIS for prostitutes and cocaine?
Give the call to the order. Members on my right. The member for Lyons will cease interjecting. Give the call to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme, the Minister for Services Australia.
Even though the question is no au revoir today, my friend. The Minister. No, just all jokes aside, returning to the issue of the NDIS, which is very important. It has never, ever in the time of the NDIS been legal to spend money on illicit drugs or on prostitutes. I do say, though, that when I was looking back through my file of NDIS—
Order. The member for Deakin, just before you take the point, the leader of the the member for Deakin is going to get the call, but the Minister was asked a direct question. He was directly answering exactly when you stood up. So I want to hear your—
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So the final line of my question— so the point of order is on relevance.
Yeah.
I'm explaining, thank you. Point of order is on relevance, and the reason why it's not relevant, I asked if it's possible, not legal. Is it possible? Not legal. That can't be relevant.
The Leader of the House.
And I'd simply add to the point of order that he took that, given the time frame he referred to in the question went from the start of the scheme through to the present, then clearly within that time frame the whole of the period of the opposition were in government is relevant as well.
Look, this is a sensitive This is a sensitive matter, which I'm sure the House wants to deal with in an appropriate and diligent way. But under the standing orders, which I'm governed by and which every member is, the minister was asked a question regarding issues and substances, and it was directly talking about that. I don't know what he was going to say next. I can appreciate the member wanted to clarify the question, but that's not an appropriate time to do that. But I appreciate his assistance in this matter. So the minister is just going to return to the question.
The scheme does have its problems with fraud, though. That is true. And we heard at estimates the work that this government is doing to crack down on it. I went through my file about when did the ministers of the government start talking about fraud, and I went through all of these 7 coalition ministers for the NDIS. Do you know they never put out one press release on challenging or detecting fraud? Not one. Zip. Nada. Zilch. So, really, the assumption that the opposition member is making is that somehow under this government fraud has started and it was never existing under the previous government. The real story of the NDIS is that it's a great idea and it's changing lots of lives. There are a lot of good service providers in it and our participants are benefiting. But it is not working as it should. And yes, I agree that some people are manipulating participants. There are reports which this government's been discovering. Well, we are the ones discovering the fraud.
The minister will pause. The minister will just resume his seat. Look, I've reminded the House of the sensitive nature of this issue and topic, and I want it handled sensitively and I want it dealt with appropriately and professionally. So the minister will continue, but the member for Deakin is now warned, and I don't want him, and I would ask his assistants not to interject the remainder of the answer. The minister has the call.
We've done more to fix up the NDIS in the last 2 years than they did in the previous 7-9 years. We do more every day to fix up the NDIS than they did in the last 7 and 9 years. I mean, I remember the previous government. Their interest in fraud was sending out 500,000 unlawful debt notices to the victims of robo-debt, and you let the crooks in the NDIS drive by.
Order. The minister is straying into order. The minister is now straying into territory that he wasn't asked about. He won't be able to refer to that for the remainder of the answer.
I remember very clearly that under the previous government, the previous Prime Minister gave himself a medal for the Strawberry Wars, where he personally took on the strawberry issue. But unfortunately, if they'd shown as much time trying to fix up the crooks as we do, then we wouldn't have inherited the problems we have. But I promise taxpayers, and I promise participants that every day this government's in power, we are making the NDIS better for the participants in the scheme. And I tell you something else. The crooks and the fraudsters know that under this government, the easy ride is over, the easy ride the coalition gave them for 9 terrible years.
Give a call to the honourable member for Werriwa.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to give more people from the outer suburbs the opportunity to go to university, and why is it important for a future made in Australia?
Give a call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the wonderful member for Werriwa for her question. In the budget, we're wiping around $3 billion of HECS debt for more than 3 million Australians, including about 26,000 Australians in the member for Werriwa's electorate. And that helps with the cost of degrees. We're also providing financial support for the first time for teaching students, for nursing students and for social work students while they do their prac. And that helps with the cost of living while they're at uni. And we're also doing something about the cost of a lot of young people missing out on going to university altogether. Almost 1 in 2 young Australians in their 20s or 30s have a university degree, but not everywhere, not in the regions and not in our outer suburbs. In Mossman in Sydney, 71% of young adults have a uni degree today, but 50 kilometres away in Mount Druitt, it's 33%. In St Lucia in Brisbane, it's 75%. In Logan City, it's 20%. In Elizabeth Bay, it's 68%. In Elizabeth in South Australia, it's only 7%. And that's not fair. And it's also not good for our country, because the fact is we need more people to go to TAFE and more people to get a crack at university. The Universities Accord sets a target that by 2050, 80% of our workforce will have a TAFE qualification or a university degree. And it says that we're not going to get there unless we help more people from our regions and from our outer suburbs to get to uni and to succeed when they get there. One of the things it recommends is university study hubs in our outer suburbs. We already have them in our regions and we're rolling out more. And now, for the first time, we're going to put them in our outer suburbs. Applications for 14 are now open, and I'd encourage all members who represent the outer suburbs of our big cities to work with your local community and put in an application. We've got to smash that invisible barrier that makes a lot of young people in our outer suburbs think that university's not for them, that it's somewhere else for someone else. And these university study hubs in their local suburb are part of that. It's not just about fairness, it's good for our economy, because more people going to TAFE and more people going to university means more skills and more jobs and more people earning more money. Economic analysis from the Department of Education indicates that if we hit that 80% target, that $240 billion in additional income will be earned across the country over the next 2 decades. That's more Australians earning more money, and it's more jobs in our cities, in our regions and in our outer suburbs.
Give the call to the member for Clark.
Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, it's obvious the government doesn't want a gambling advertising ban because it's scared of a backlash from the media and big sporting codes and doesn't want to lose donations from the gambling companies. But this is entirely at odds with community expectations and what a unanimous parliamentary inquiry recommended a year ago. So why don't you do your job and ban the advertising? Why don't you get it done?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Clark for his action, for his question. And what we are doing is taking action. We've launched BetStop, the National Self-Exclusion Register. We've mandated customer pre-verification for all new online wagering accounts to prevent kids from gambling and strengthen protections for Australians who've registered for BetStop. We've agreed with states and territories on new minimum classifications for video games with gambling-like content. We've introduced nationally consistent staff training. We've implemented new evidence-based taglines to replace the former gamble responsibly.
The member for Clark. Prime Minister was asked about the issue and what is he doing about the issue. He's reading specifically into the Hansard and into the House exactly what he was asked about. You may not like the answer, or you may not be happy about what's in the answer, or maybe not be addressing what you'd like it to be in the answer. But if you're going to get up and ask a point of relevance, just because that's not how the standing orders work, and the member's been here long enough to understand that, but out of respect for him, I will take the point of order.
Thank you, Speaker. On relevance, the question was very specific. It only went to the issue of gambling advertising.
Well, the Prime Minister is addressing exactly the topic and about the committee report involving the issue. So we've got to get everyone understanding that when an answer is directly relevant about the topic that a minister or the Prime Minister was asked, if it's not answering exactly the way you want, that is not an excuse to simply rise on your feet and say, I don't like the answer, I want it to be more specific. And it is happening more and more all the time. And it's simply under the standing orders. I don't have that, and it is disorderly. So if it continues, I will have to take action to all members. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I'm going through the actions that we are taking, which is what gambling advertising is about, getting people to gamble. That's what it's about, and I'm going through the measures that we have put in place already. Legislated a ban on the use of credit cards for gambling, which is a major issue. source of grief out there in the community, and that certainly was something that was considered by the committee when it was developing its report. We've also required online wagering companies to send their customers monthly activity statements outlining wins and losses. Now, the government is continuing to examine further issues, what more can be done, including further restrictions on gambling advertising. But we want to make sure it's not much good if you're shutting down an ad in one place only for it to pop up somewhere else. The truth is that these issues are complex because people in 2024 don't just have televisions or radios, they carry with them devices where ads can pop up and appear, where people can get access not just from Australia but access from overseas as well without any controls whatsoever because of the nature of the accounts and the nature of those devices and the nature of the way that the internet operates with VPNs. So we want to make sure that any measures that are taken actually can deliver on the outcome that we want. We want people to not engage in gambling in a way that damages families, that causes harm, that causes addiction, because we know that that can have a devastating impact on the community. But we do want to make sure that any measures are got right, and that's why I would encourage the member to continue to work with the government on these issues to make sure, indeed, that we do get it right.
The call on member for Mitchell.
How is the Albanese Labor government easing the cost of living pressures and getting wages moving for workers in our early childhood education and care sector?
Call to the Minister for Early Childhood Education and the Minister for Youth.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for McEwen for his question and, of course, for his ongoing advocacy for low-paid workers in McEwen, such as the wonderful early childhood educators that we visited together at Mernda Early Learning Centre in McEwen. Now, Mr Speaker, Labor knows that people are doing it tough, whether that's in McEwen or indeed in Cowan. And since the Albanese government came into office, we've been laser-focused on delivering real cost of living relief for Australians without adding to inflation. This is not just something we say, it's something that we do, by ensuring that people can earn more and keep more of what they earn. Now, during the election, the Prime Minister promised to absolutely back in an increase to the minimum wage. And now, Mr Speaker, in government, we've overseen and supported not one, not two, but three wage increases for low-paid workers. And from July 1st, the latest increase in the annual wage review will see another 2.6 million workers better off. For early childhood education workers, those dedicated professionals who care and educate our most precious asset, our children, that's a further 3.75% pay rise. Because, Mr Speaker, on this side of the House, we see decent wages as part of the solution, not part of the problem to the cost of living challenges. It's why we're not only getting wages moving again, but also delivering tax cuts for every Australian taxpayer. Now, for an early childhood educator, tax cuts, Labor's tax cuts and the wage increases means this. It means an extra $109 per week back in their pockets since we came into office. For too long, the incredible work of early childhood education workers has been overlooked and undervalued. That's why we've also made an historic commitment to provide funding towards a wage increase for early childhood education and care workers. An important step to properly valuing them, but also an important foundation for the reform that we want to see to the vision that we have for an early childhood education and care sector that is universal in that it is accessible, it is affordable and it is, importantly, inclusive. Now, we've already delivered more affordable early learning for more than 1 million families, down by 11% on average. We're already delivering cost of living relief to our early childhood educators, with more to come, Mr Speaker. And we're getting on with the job of achieving our vision for Australia's children, because only Labor has a vision for an early childhood education system.
The call to the honourable member for Parkes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Veterans Affairs and Defence Personnel. Has the minister ever advocated to expand recruitment to the Australian Defence Force beyond the Five Eyes countries?
Give a call to the Minister for Veterans Affairs and the Minister for Defence Personnel. Order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I thank the member for his question and his great interest in expanding our Defence Force, because I think, as we all know in this chamber, it's important that we grow the size of the Australian Defence Force, especially given the geostrategic circumstances that we face. And it's most unfortunate, Mr Speaker, that unfortunately when we came to government, we faced a situation where unfortunately the numbers in our Defence Force were going backwards, which has meant we have had to be bold when we've looked at what do we do to grow our Australian Defence Force. And so that has meant looking at issues such as how can we engage the permanent resident population of Australia. So I was very pleased, along with the Deputy Prime Minister earlier this week, to be able to announce— Mr Speaker, really?
Well, you can resume your seat. You don't need to Mr Speaker me. Give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, out of respect to you and to the House, could the minister please answer the question? It was, has the minister ever advocated to expand recruitment to the Australian Defence Force to people beyond the Five Eyes countries? It was tight. Nothing.
Resume
I know
your seat. The Chief Government Whip will cease interjecting. Just remind the Opposition Leader that's not an opportunity to restate the question, but I appreciate he's entitled to take the point of order on relevance. The Minister was asked about policy regarding recruitment, so he's going to have to now, with just under 1 minute in with the preamble, he's going to have to address the question or take it on notice or resume his seat. The Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As I was trying to get to, the policy that we announced this week, which is very important, about expanding our Defence Force and looking at how we can use permanent residents, making sure that they're suitably vetted, goes to New Zealanders from July this year, goes to Five Eyes Nations permanent residents in Australia from 1 January. And as I said on Tuesday, as did the Deputy Prime Minister, we have spoken about then looking at our Pacific Island neighbours, those that are in our region, and we'll look to that in that direction after we've moved through New Zealanders in July and then other Five Eyes nations from 1 January. That's what I've spoken about. That's what I've advocated for, and I thank the member for his interest in this, as much as I also thank the member for Canning for his support for the same policy approach as well.
Order. Order. The Deputy Prime Minister will cease interjecting, so I can hear from the member for McNamara.
Thank you very much, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. What action has the Albanese Labor government taken to get wages moving, and what approaches to wages has the government ruled out?
Call to the Minister for Employment, Workplace Relations and Minister for the Arts.
Thanks very much, Speaker, and I thank the member for McNamara. There's 95,000 taxpayers in his electorate who are heading on 1 July towards a tax cut, and also a whole series of award workers among the 2.6 million around the country who get a pay rise on the 1st of July this year. And those pay rises and tax cuts are possible because we have an Albanese Labor government. That's why it's there, because a Labor government will always fight to get wages moving, while a coalition government would always fight to keep wages low. And it's not simply the award workers who are seeing changes coming. Gig workers, delivery riders, truck drivers are now on a pathway to having some minimum standards where previously they had none because we changed the law. Aged care workers, 15% pay rise because you have the Albanese Labor government. Retail workers are now bargaining with companies that had left the bargaining table for years because the bargaining system was broken, but because we changed the law, are back at the bargaining table now. Teachers and support staff in non-government schools. There's a whole lot of teachers and support staff in non-government schools who for years went from one short-term contract to the next, to the next. Some of them would have qualified if they were permanent for long service leave, and yet they still didn't have a secure job. Those workers are now finding themselves being transferred to permanent, direct, secure employment. Sheet metal workers, the people who put the air conditioning systems together, because we changed the bargaining system, now have a single interest enterprise agreement, multi-employer agreement together, which means they're looking down now at 6% pay rises every year for 4 years because we changed the law. There's women working in the finance sector who used to not be able to find out what the men were being paid because of secrecy clauses that those opposite voted to protect. Well, they weren't successful. We changed the law, and people are now able to see where pay equity needs to be fixed. Early childhood education and care workers are at the bargaining table now for pay rises because we changed the law. Coal mine workers are already getting employed directly and seeing increases in their pay because we changed the law. Flight attendants who are now seeing, because we changed the laws on same job, same pay, that they're going to be paid properly. Manufacturing workers are now looking down at knowing that they have a government that is backing their secure employment with a future made in Australia. And on every one of these, the common factor is it's happened because of the Albanese Labor government, and those opposite said no.
Give the call to the honourable member for Warringah.
To the Prime Minister. Prior to the 7 October terrorist attacks, approximately 15,000 trucks a month delivered essential humanitarian aid, including food, fuel and water, to Gaza. I understand that approximately only 2,020 trucks entered Gaza last month, so only 13% of previous levels. Many Australians have grave concerns of impending levels of catastrophic food and water insecurity, and a famine may soon be declared. What steps is the government taking within its power to ensure essential humanitarian aid, food and water gets to Gaza?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Warringah for her question, and indeed Australia does remain deeply concerned about the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza. We continue to call for safe, unimpeded and sustained access for humanitarian supplies to enable life-saving support for civilians in Gaza. We committed $62.5 million in humanitarian assistance to the region since the 7th of October. That includes $41 million in response to support people affected by the conflict, $11.5 million to refugee programs in Lebanon and Jordan to address the ongoing regional refugee crisis, $4 million to UNICEF to provide urgent services, including for women and children in Gaza, and $2 million to the UN Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator's new mechanism to facilitate expanded humanitarian access into Gaza. Our funding has been directed to conflict-affected people with a focus on women and children, including to support food, water, medicines and shelter. We're also supporting efforts by Jordan and the UAE to assist with the delivery of vital humanitarian aid to civilians in Gaza. We've supplied 140 Australian Defence Force aerial delivery parachutes for use in humanitarian assistance airdrops by Jordan and the UAE. We have, of course, continued to reiterate our opposition to the ground offensive in Rafah. We called that out, including in advance with a joint statement by myself, the Prime Minister of Canada and New Zealand, where we said this: there is growing international consensus. Israel must listen to its friends and it must listen to the international community. The protection of civilians is paramount and a requirement under international humanitarian law. Palestinian civilians cannot be made to pay the price of defeating Hamas. We are clear that a sustainable ceasefire is necessary to finding a path towards securing lasting peace for Israelis and Palestinians. Ultimately, a negotiated political solution is needed to achieve lasting peace and security. Australia, Canada and New Zealand remain steadfast in their commitment to a two-state solution. We also have supported the call by President Biden and the US proposition which would see an end to the conflict. We've consistently voted for month after month in the United Nations for UN resolutions calling for a cessation of conflict. As President Biden has said, a deal would allow the United States and our partners to begin the work to rebuild homes, schools and hospitals in Gaza to help repair communities destroyed in the chaos of war.
Call to the honourable member for Fremantle.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Environment and Water. How are the projects approved by the Albanese Labor government helping to transform Australia into a renewable energy superpower, and what proposals has the government rejected?
Call to the Minister for the Environment and Water.
Thanks so much, Mr Speaker, and thanks so much to the member for Fremantle. He is a strong and effective advocate for net zero in Australia and for a nature-positive Australia as well. And we on this side and up in the crossbench over there all are committed to getting Australia to net zero, and that includes, of course, a commitment to get to 82% renewable energy in our grid. And I'm very pleased to have had a very small part in helping to make that transition by now ticking off on 51 renewable energy projects since we came to government. That is enough energy to power well over 3 million homes. And on top of that, we've got another 136 renewable energy projects in the pipeline before us right now. I'd like to say also that we have, since coming to government, managed to double average on-time approvals. So those opposite talk about the approval system and how slow it is. We have doubled on-time approvals since coming to government. And of course, the Future Made in Australia plan will help us by building solar panels here, batteries here and investing in green hydrogen. Now, of course, those opposite have a different plan. For 10 years, when they were told that 24 coal-fired power stations were closing, they did nothing to plan for the energy that would be required to replace that electricity in the grid. But they've come up with a plan now. They've come up with a $387 billion fantasy of a plan to roll out nuclear power across the country. We know that Australian homes and businesses are calling for affordable power now, and instead they are offering the most expensive form of energy in decades to come. We've had the Leader of the Opposition running up and down the east coast of Australia and elsewhere saying, oh, the wind farms, the koalas will be hurt by the wind farms, the whales will be hurt by the wind farms. What he wants to do is dump John Howard's environment laws so he can build nuclear reactors anywhere. What we know about those opposite is it's the fast track for nuclear and the slow lane for renewables.
Call to the honourable member for Casey.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. I refer to the government's decision to commit $940 million of taxpayers' money to the American company PsiQuantum without holding an open tender process. Has the Deputy Prime Minister or his office met with PsiQuantum's lobbyist, his former Chief of Staff, Lydia Ivanovsky, or the Treasurer's former senior staffer, Jared Richardson, or arranged or facilitated any such meetings with any other minister or their staff?
Give the call to the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister for Defence.
Well, I thank the member for his question. The decisions around the funding of PsiQuantum have all occurred in the appropriate way, in accordance with all the processes leading up to the budget. There was appropriate national security assessments done in relation to this investment, and again, that was undertaken through all the mechanisms of the Cabinet and the Cabinet's committee processes. And all the meetings that have occurred in the process of this have happened in accordance with the Cabinet Code of Conduct.
Order. Order. Give the call to the honourable member for Newcastle.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
What is the Albanese Labor government's approach to lowering energy bills? What policies have been rejected, and why is it important to be upfront with the Australian people?
Call to the order. Before I call the Minister, just want the House to come to order. Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for Newcastle for her question. And our approach is to provide real, practical relief, Mr Speaker, now, through our coal and gas caps, Mr Speaker, through our energy rebates provided both in the last budget and in this budget, $300 for every single energy bill payer in the country.
The member for Barker will leave the chamber under 94A.
And we're also, Mr Speaker, for the medium term, continuing the rollout of renewable energy, as the Minister for the Environment has just outlined. And I'm pleased to tell the member for Newcastle House that renewable energy in our energy grid is up 25% since the day we came to office, Mr Speaker, because that is the cheapest form of energy. Now, what we've rejected is a form of energy which is slow and expensive to build and is a risk when it comes to reliability of our energy system, and that, of course, is nuclear. Now, Mr Speaker, it's been 674 days since the Leader of the Opposition said that he would take the Liberal and National parties down the road of risky reactors, Mr Speaker. 674 days, and what a mystery tour, what a magical mystery tour it's been of half-truths and myths and contradictions. Now, we were told it was all about small modular reactors. The Leader of the Opposition said it was all about small modular reactors, and in January 2023 the Leader of the Opposition said, if you Google small modular reactors and have a look at what the company like NuScale is doing. Very good advice. I always take the Leader of the Opposition seriously. Someone's got to. So, Mr Speaker, I did Google NuScale. The first item says, flagship US nuclear reactor project collapses, owing taxpayers $930 million. Second one, small modular nuclear reactor that was hailed by the coalition as the future is cancelled due to rising costs. And the third one, cancelled NuScale contract weighs heavily on new nuclear, Mr Speaker. So it was all about small modular reactors, and then the Leader of the Opposition doubled down. He told journalists, he told Sky, I believe it was, and I quote, in March 2023, I don't support the establishment of big nuclear facilities here at all. I'm opposed to it. Pretty clear. Pretty clear. Next minute, the Australian's reporting the plan will now involve large-scale nuclear reactors, despite earlier ruling out large-scale reactors. Mr Speaker, all over the shop. All over the shop. Now, Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition has had 674 days. He was asked the other day why he hasn't yet announced his policy. He said, well, I've answered that in relation to we'll make the announcement in due course. We won't dance to Chris Bowen or the Saturdays tune or anything like that. I'm not sure who the Saturday is or what the tune is, Mr Speaker. I thought it was the transcript from the member for New England. That was the level of eloquence. But I checked and it was the Leader of the Opposition. He said he wasn't going to dance to the Saturdays tune. Well, he announced 12 weeks ago that he'd release his policy in a couple of weeks' time. It's time for the Leader of the Opposition to show the Australian people his plans.
Order. Give the call to the honourable member for Durack.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. Has the Deputy Prime Minister or his office met with PSI Quantum's lobbyists, his former Chief of Staff, Lydia Ivanowski, or the Treasurer's former senior staffer, Gerard Richardson, or arranged or facilitated any such meetings with any other minister or their staff?
Give a call to the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister for Defence.
Well, I thank the member for her question, and I refer the member to my previous answer.
Give the order. What's on my left? Give the call to the honourable member for Dunkley.
My question is to the Prime Minister. When Parliament returns in 2 weeks, which of the Albanese Labor government's plans will be coming into effect, and are there any alternatives being proposed?
Give a call to the Prime Minister.
Well, I thank the member for Dunkley for her question. And indeed, when we depart from this place this afternoon, there'll be a couple of weeks and then we'll be back and it'll be almost July. Almost July. Almost at that point when every single taxpayer will get a tax cut on July 1. almost at that point where every household will get $300 of energy price relief. Our budget will deliver that cost of living support which Australians need. It will also be the case, importantly, that it will be a third consecutive boost in the minimum wage for 2.6 million low-wage workers. So Australians from July 1 will earn more and they'll get to keep more of what they earn. And that will be important. And it will happen whether they live in Anglesea or Gippsland or around Jervis Bay or Newcastle or Gladstone or Collie or perhaps even Bribie Island. But all of those, of course, are potential locations for the nuclear reactories over there. So they know they'll get a tax cut. They know they'll get household energy relief. They know that they'll get a wage increase. But will they get a reactor with it? Well, in the next 2 weeks, because 12 weeks ago this Leader of the Opposition said it would come in 2 weeks, so maybe if we just forget about that period in between, we'll just wipe that off. We need to see the colour of this Leader of the Opposition's money. The same people who couldn't build a commuter car park, who thought the NBN should be built with copper rather than fibre, want us to believe that they're going to build nuclear reactors here in Australia. Well, where are they going to go? Who's going to pay for them? What's the cost? What's the time frame? And what will they do in between the 15 years at least that it will take to ensure our energy security? Now, those opposite are always obsessed with power, but they're hopeless on energy, Mr Speaker. Hopeless on energy, obsessed by power. They have the next 2 weeks. We'll await day after day after day an answer from this Leader of the Opposition. And on that prospective note, Mr Speaker, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Before I call the Manager of Opposition, the Minister for International Development and Defence has asked to supplement an answer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I seek to supplement an answer in question time due to the microphones cutting out. There is order. Yeah.
Order.
I seek.
Yeah.
I seek to add to an answer.
Proceed.
There
Order.
is
Members on my left. That's the member for Page. Minister's adding to his answer, which he's entitled to under the standing orders. He will continue.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There is misinformation regarding who has contracted with Elbit. The Commonwealth has a contract with Hanwha Defence Australia to build infantry fighting vehicles in Australia. Hanwha Defence Australia has contracted to Elbit to build the turrets of those vehicles in Australia without the Commonwealth being a party to that contract. These vehicles are being built in Australia for use by the Australian Army. Any suggestion that we are exporting weapons or ammunition to Israel is false. Defence has confirmed Australia has not supplied weapons or ammunition to Israel since the Hamas-Israel conflict began and for at least the past 5 years. Defence export permits that were issued were for items other than weapons and ammunition, such as dual-use technologies and components of ADF equipment being repaired. As the conflict has evolved, the government is approving export permits only for items for Australian defence and law enforcement that will return to Australia. The recent data published by DFAT referring to the export of $1.5 million in arms and ammunition to Israel in February refers to the export of a single item for the Australian Defence Force that will return to Australia disproving the misinformation being peddled by the Greens. The misinformation being peddled by the Greens political party continues to divide our community, attacks the 100,000 Australians working in the defence industry, all for short-term political advantage.
Order. Order. The member for Griffith. The members on my right will cease objecting. I want to hear from the manager, but before members leave, I'm pleased to advise the House that on June 20th, for the first time, Parliament will be open to the St Vincent de Paul Society CEO sleepout, and I'd like to thank all members for their generosity. But there is always room to be in the Speaker's good book. Give the call. Order. The manager of opposition business is seeking the call.
Mr Speaker, I seek to make a personal explanation.
Do you claim to be misrepresented?
I do, Mr Speaker.
You may proceed.
Just a few minutes ago in question time, the Minister for the NDIS said, "I went through all of the 7 coalition ministers for the NDIS. They never put out one press release on challenging or detecting fraud." As one of those ministers, I have been grievously misrepresented. On the 18th of October 2018, I put out a press release together with the now Leader of the Opposition, which was headed "NDIS Task Force Makes First Arrest." The coalition government established the NDIS Fraud Task Force in July to tackle potential fraud against the NDIS. There have been similar media releases about fraud in the NDIS issued by coalition ministers on the 22nd of April 2021, the 31st of July 2021, the 15th of November 2021 and the 7th of December 2021. Now, the Minister for NDIS has formed in misleading the unfortunate workers of Chiquita Mushrooms, but he cannot mislead this House. He must come in and correct the record.
Call to the honourable member for McPherson.
Thank you, Speaker. I seek to make a personal explanation.
Do you claim to be misrepresented?
I do indeed.
You may proceed.
Speaker, during question time, the Minister for the NDIS made a statement, and I'll read that out. It said, "I went through my file about when did the ministers of the government start talking about fraud, and I went through all of the 7 coalition ministers for the NDIS. They never put out one press release on challenging or detecting fraud, not one that zip, nata, milch." Now, I have in front of me a media release that it's a joint media release with myself and Senator the Honourable Linda Reynolds, CSC, at the time that she was the NDIS minister, and it's actually headed "Morrison Government Cracks Down on NDIS Fraud," and it actually goes to the arrest of. It actually goes to the arrest of a man for allegedly defrauding the NDIS of more than $120,000. Now, in that media release, I actually said, quote, "All Australians suffer when public money is defrauded. That's why this government is serious about taking strong action to protect against fraud." I also said the hard-working men and women of the AFP and their members in the NDIS Fraud Task Force should be proud of the work they are doing to protect people with a disability and safeguard the integrity of taxpayer funds. Minister Reynolds at the time said, "This alleged criminal activity is precisely why the federal government recently extended the NDIS Fraud Task Force on an indefinite basis." Mr Speaker, the minister needs to return to the House and withdraw his remarks.
The member for Wannon is seeking the call.
Thanks, Speaker. And can I just ask a question before I also make a personal explanation?
Is it a question to me?
Yeah, to you, Speaker, if that's okay. What is the process if a minister has misled the House in such egregious way? Is he required to come back and add to an answer?
The member has been here long enough to understand the process of how that works. The member now is seeking the call.
Thanks, Speaker. I also would like to make a personal explanation.
Do you claim to be misrepresented?
I do, and it goes to the establishment of the NDIS Fraud Task Force, which was established on the 24th of July 2018. It was one of the first things that I did as Minister for Social Services. And can I say that I did it in conjunction with the Honourable Michael Keenan and the Honourable Angus Taylor, and we put out a release, and I won't read the whole release, but it says this: the task force will have 100 dedicated personnel to tackle fraud through combined law enforcement efforts, increased information sharing and analytics, and enhanced connecting
I'm sorry to interrupt
across government.
but you haven't explained who misrepresented you and how it was not. You've just started reading the press release. So just explain to the House, like the member for McPherson did, what happened and why it was wrong.
So I've been misrepresented by the Minister for Social Services, the Honourable Bill Shorten, and the Minister, and the Minister for NDIS, the Honourable Bill Shorten, when he said that not one coalition,
the Minister for the NDIS, not the Minister for Social
the Minister
Services.
for the NDIS. That not one coalition.
The Minister for Social Services.
It's very hard because the noise, the interjection, and everything. It's
We'll just continue, and if members on my right would assist the House and show respect to the member for Wannon.
Thank you.
He may continue.
The Leader of Opposition Business is the one who's also yelling, and he should know better. So what the Minister for the NDIS said was that not one coalition member had put out one single press release in relation to fraud. He said nada, nothing, fraud. So
the member for McEwen and the member for Hume.
This is what this press release said. The government takes fraud very seriously, and people who commit fraud against the NDIS are taking money from Australians with a disability, which will not be tolerated. Speaker, this is a very serious issue. Someone has misled the House grievously, and it should be corrected.
Okay, we'll just move to the Manager Opposition Business.
Mr Speaker, I move that so much of standing and sessional orders be suspended.
Well, may I just do papers first, and then we've just got to get through, and then we'll come straight back to just get through before we move to the MPI. I'm just going to call the Leader of Order. Whoever interjects next won't be here for what I'm about to say or hear anything that's going to happen. No point pointing to anyone. I can hear exactly what's going on. Everyone's just going to be silent. I'm just going to call the Leader of the House, and we'll do this in an orderly way with papers.
Thanks, Speaker. These documents are tabled in accordance with the list circulated to the honourable members earlier today. Full details of the documents will be recorded in the votes and proceedings.
I thank the Leader of the House. I give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
Mr Speaker, I move that so much of standing and sessional orders be suspended as would prevent the Manager of Opposition Business from moving the following motion forthwith: that the Minister for the NDIS be required to come into the House immediately and withdraw his factually incorrect claims about the issue of media releases concerning fraud under the previous coalition government, concerning the NDIS and fraud under the previous coalition government, and apologise for misleading the House. Mr Speaker, this is urgent because what we have seen is the most cynical and deliberate misleading of this House. I'm going to just ask my colleague to—
Yes, just the Manager just to resume his seat for a moment. The Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, the word deliberate was just used. That is not possible to be used during a suspension motion. That is highly disorderly and should be withdrawn and ought not be said again during the suspension debate.
I'll just get the Manager to withdraw that and ensure that that's not used during
being asked to withdraw, Mr.
deliberately.
Well, I'm happy to withdraw the word deliberate, Mr Speaker. Now, let's just remind the House what was said by the Minister for the NDIS. He made the factually incorrect claim that none of the 7 ministers for the NDIS under the previous coalition government had issued a media release in relation to fraud. He went on to emphasise that statement with the use of words like zip and nada, but what he said was completely incorrect, Mr Speaker, completely factually incorrect. I want to make the point that on the 18th of October, a media release was issued by the now Leader of the Opposition, together with myself, the then Minister for Families and Social Services and Minister with responsibility for the NDIS at that time, headed NDIS Task Force Makes First Arrest. The Coalition Government established the National Disability Insurance Scheme Fraud Task Force in July to tackle potential fraud against the NDIS. Today we can announce that the task force has made a significant arrest. That was not a one-off, Mr Speaker. That was not something that was the only media release issued over a period in which 7 successive coalition ministers, or a number of coalition ministers I should say, had responsibility for the NDIS. For example, on the 22nd of April 2021, a media release was issued by the then Minister for Home Affairs and the then Minister for the NDIS. What that release was headed was Morrison government moves to protect NDIS from organised crime. It read as follows. It spoke in relation to Operation Pegasus, a months-long NDIS fraud task force investigation into an alleged criminal syndicate. So an investigation being carried out in relation to alleged fraud against the NDIS and a statement, a media release issued by 2 coalition ministers, including the then coalition minister responsible for the NDIS. On the 31st of July 2021, a media release headed Extended Crackdown on NDIS Fraud, and the then Minister for the NDIS, Senator Reynolds, the National Disability Insurance Scheme is extending the NDIS Fraud Task Force. We had a media release on the 15th of November 2021, more than $10 million of incorrect or non-compliant payments for the National Disability Insurance Scheme have been identified since July, and the media release spoke of the Specialist National Disability Insurance Agency Compliance Response Team. And then, of course, there was a media release on the 7th of December 2021, again a joint release between the then Minister for Home Affairs and the then Minister with responsibility for the NDIS, reporting that the Australian Federal Police had executed search warrants across 3 premises, working jointly with the National Disability Insurance Agency fraud team. That is just a handful, Mr Speaker, a sample of the releases that were issued by coalition ministers in relation to fraud and the National Disability Insurance Scheme and the National Disability Insurance Agency. I informed the House of that to allow the House to then consider the accuracy of the statement that was made by the Minister for the NDIS some 30 or 40 minutes ago here in this place in question time. He had this to say: I went through my file about when did the ministers of the government start talking about fraud, and I went through all of the 7 coalition ministers for the NDIS. They never put out one press release on challenging or detecting fraud. Not one that. Zip. Nada. The Hansard says Milch, but I think it might be zilch. That statement, Mr Speaker, is completely incorrect. It is entirely incorrect. And it's not something that he just made up on the fly. He told us he prepared for this. He told us that he'd gone through his files.
Speechwriter's been working at it.
He may well have had the assistance of his $620,000 speechwriter. in preparing those remarks which he has just made in this House. Now, the fact is, Mr Speaker, that the member for Maribyrnong has form in being highly misleading. The workers of Chiquita Mushrooms, for example, thought that he was acting in an unqualified way in their best interests when he was the Secretary of the Australian Workers' Union. But in fact, we know that there was a deal done under which Chiquita Mushrooms workers, represented by the AWU, ended up with terms that were not as good as many other workers. But there were unusual payments to the union. $4,000 a month payments the union received over 6 months in return for what the union then led by the current member for Maribyrnong, claimed was for health and safety training. Now, the fact is, Mr Speaker, that it may be the case that the member for Maribyrnong is used to operating in environments where he can get away with making statements that are entirely factually wrong and that have the consequence that claims are made against individuals and indeed people who have had significant positions of responsibility in this nation which are entirely factually incorrect. He may be used to working in environments where he's able to do that, but this is not such an environment. If you make a statement in this place which is clearly, demonstrably and factually wrong, and if you make that statement and preface it with clear evidence that you have prepared in making that statement, that you've gone through your files, you can hardly then say, oh, it was an accident. I somehow managed to miss the 5 media releases that I was able to find with the assistance of my hard-working staff and other hard-working coalition staff in about 15 minutes. 5 media releases. There may very well be more. There may very well be more. But we haven't found just one proof point that what he said was factually incorrect. We haven't found just 2. We haven't found 3. We found 5 in literally a few minutes, Mr Speaker. I doubt there has been, certainly in this term of parliament and perhaps for a very long time, such an exercise in making a statement which is clearly untrue and which is clearly calculated to provide political advantage, because what the minister was seeking to do was position himself as some kind of holder of virtue on this matter, as the person solely who has twigged to the fact that there may be a risk of fraud. He should have twigged to this a very long time ago, because he was the genius who created this in the first place. And I tell you, every one of those coalition ministers worked very hard to try and clean up the mess he created. In the 2 years that he's been in government, he's done very little about it, and the best he can do is make statements which are entirely factually incorrect about the record of coalition ministers. So this minister needs to return and apologise.
Is the motion seconded? Give the call to the member for Riverina.
The motion is seconded, absolutely, Mr Speaker, and suspension of standing and sessional orders is very important, because we now have 1 hour and 15 minutes left of this parliament this week. And it's so important that the member for Maribyrnong, the Minister for the NDIS, responsible for one of the most important parts of government, comes back into this chamber and explains why he has, accidentally or otherwise, misled the House on this very important issue. He cannot have gone through his files and found that the coalition, when in government, did nothing about fraud in this important space. To say otherwise is to malign those very good, hard-working ministers of the coalition who did absolutely everything to make sure that any fraudulent activity was not only addressed but was brought to heel by the then government. And the member for Maribyrnong has been here since 2007. He knows better than to go to that dispatch box and suggest that something otherwise was done. Indeed, we put in place measures to absolutely crack down on fraudulent activity. And you heard from the member for Bradfield, who feels slighted by the fact that something else was suggested. The member for Macpherson, who produced a media release who absolutely said that not only were we cracking down on fraudulent activity, but there was a fellow who was arrested for doing that very thing.
The member for Riverina will pause. The member for Hasluck, it doesn't assist the continual interjections. The member for Riverina has the call.
Solo mo quo votrav yen on son. Maybe he's thinking of adventures in gay Peru. Maybe his speechwriter have suggested otherwise, that he has got his mind on other things, maybe ambassadorial roles. But he knows better than to go to that dispatch box in question time where the truth is important. The truth is important. And when you are a minister, you have to tell the truth. Now, whether it's accident or otherwise, he has absolutely misled this House, we do believe, and it's important that he's got an hour and 10 minutes, 12 minutes to come back into this chamber. The House of Practice it absolutely demands he do so. We are requesting that he does so. Convention by the Westminster system absolutely makes it crystal clear that he should come back into this House and explain himself. Come back into this House and admit that he was wrong. It's not hard to say you were wrong. It's up to him to say that he was wrong, and he knows that he was wrong. He can't suggest that the coalition never put out a media release, and his file suggests that there was no media release, because we know and we've proven in these statements that the otherwise was the actual fact. And it's absolutely plain as day. The member for Macpherson, the then Home Affairs Minister, says all Australians suffer when public money is defrauded. That's why this government, the coalition government, is serious about taking strong action to protect against fraud. It's rather damning to suggest that the coalition-winning government did not do anything about fraud in the NDIS space. And for the minister, the former opposition leader, who led Labor to the 2016 and 2019 elections, not quite sure how that went for him, but he is very senior. He's been in this place as the member for Maribyrnong since 2007. It's incumbent upon him to come back into this chamber and to explain himself, to admit that he got it wrong, to admit that that speechwriter that we're paying $600,000 worth of taxpayers' money, perhaps that person got it wrong. But somebody got it wrong. The buck stops with him, because he was the one who said it. He was the one who erroneously claimed that the now opposition, the then government, did nothing to crack down on fraud in the NDIS. We did. We did, and we've had minister after minister say that very thing. We've got the media releases. I hear the member for Watson. We've proven it. We can table those media releases. Obviously, that the member for Maribyrnong says he hasn't got them in his files, but he would. He only has to ask his department, and they would have produced them. So to suggest anything else is breaching convention, is breaching the Westminster system, is breaching the House of Practice, and is breaching the good grace of this parliament, where truth is important. Labor came to office in May 2022 and they said, we will restore integrity, we'll let the sunshine in, we'll be transparent. This minister today has not been any of those things, and it's up to him to come back into this chamber now. And if the member for Watson, who is ever following me in this speech, is just got an absolute slight even consideration of how important House of Practice is, how important the Westminster system is, and here he is. And here he is. Thankfully, he's going to hopefully make that truth be accountable.
The question is the motion be agreed to, and I give the call to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme.
I said in question time that the now opposition, when they were in government, did nothing to tackle fraud, and they allowed the circumstances to create where the crooks could come in. And did I hear in this motion any outrage about that? No. In this motion, I also said that they didn't reform the NDIS and that they allowed a set of circumstances where participants were not getting a good deal and being looked after. But did they complain about that? Oh, no, they didn't. But what I should have realised is that the only way you can get something more than a heartbeat out of the opposition is say that they didn't issue a press release. I apologise for missing the 5 press releases you did in 9 years, or the 6, or the 10. But what I'm most amused about, and I don't know if there is the capacity for insight and self-reflection, whoever dreamed this tactic up, is there was no outrage about the NDIS, no outrage about their lack of effort in reform, no outrage about the payment systems they allowed to occur, but goodness me, I will fight to the death if you insult me for not putting out a press release. It's just, you know, how do you find a lost coalition politician in the forest? You stake an allegation they didn't issue a press release and they'll find you. I mean, I listened to the manager for opposition business, and I waited for him to go through all of the actions they took to fix up NDIS fraud. But to be fair to him, he couldn't talk about it because you did nothing. You did absolutely nothing. This is what we have found out upon coming to government. We found out that they had a payment system where thousands of payments are submitted, invoices are submitted in the NDIS, and each day under the current opposition, they would check 20 out of thousands before they paid it. Now, on a really good day, apparently they could get up to 21. Of course, we also found out, and I'm sure in the little voices inside some of the coalition members' heads, when I say this, they're going to say, how could that have happened? Between 5 p.m. and 6:30 p.m. on any day that these characters were mismanaging the NDIS, if an invoice whistled in between 5...
Order.
Oh, you can give it, but you can't take it.
Order. The minister will just pause. Order. The member for O'Connor will cease interjecting. I want to hear from the member for Riverina.
Point of order. The member for Maribyrnong, the minister hasn't said whether he's voting for or against the motion, Mr. Speaker. Just wanted to clarify that.
The matter with these debates, there is no indication of what he needs to say.
You're outraged about the allegation that you didn't put out a press release, but you got zero outrage about being crap at managing the NDIS for 9 years.
The minister's going to withdraw.
Oh, I withdraw the word crap, but you know what I mean.
No.
I withdraw the word. I apologise. Sorry I hurt their feelings. Absolutely. Terrible. Now, no, mate. It's written from your speechwriter. I resign. Now, on the payment system, this is important because if you ever get to be in government again, it's important you learn from your mistakes. But we have discovered that between 5 p.m. and 6:30 p.m. on any day under the coalition, the crooks could put in an invoice. There was zero chance, 0 out of 100 chance that you would have your invoice checked. Isn't that a dumb way to run a system? Isn't that a shocking way to run a system? You call yourselves the economic supermen. I get the gender point, but not the super bit. And what you do is you were running a payment system. You were running a Rick, listen and learn. You were running a payment system. The member for nuclear bill.
The minister's going to pause. The minister's going to pause. We're just going to settle this. No, the minister's going to put down what he's holding up. No. We're not going to handle this debate this way. It's a serious issue. The manager's entitled to move his motion, and members are going to be referred to by the correct titles, and language is going to be used with the decorum of the House. The minister has the call.
So, what we did discover, and what Mr Dardo gave evidence about at Senate estimates, is that there were immature payment systems. Immature is nice. I think that's a generous term. But for 9 years, you were the soft touch which crooks and fraudsters and raughters, they saw the coalition coming.
Order. Order. The manager of opposition on a point of order.
Well, Mr Speaker, the issue before the House is whether standing orders should be suspended to require this minister to apologise for his factually incorrect statement. That is what he needs to be addressing.
The Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, if it is the position of the Manager of Opposition Business that under a suspension it's never to be a wide-ranging debate, then the implications for the opposition, who are much more likely to move motions of this nature than government do, will be long-lasting. And I'd simply caution against a strictness on suspension motions that hasn't been applied in this House for a very long time.
Yeah. On the point of order, member for Wannon.
Speeches have to be either for or against, Speaker, and we don't know whether it's for or against. So could you please tell us whether it's for or against?
Resume your seat. We're just going to get through this debate in an orderly way. Language is important of what we use here. Just remind the minister also under Standing Order 65 about directing comments through the chair.
Mr. Speaker, if they haven't worked out that we're voting against this suspension motion, then they're even dimmer than I already thought. So we had a payment system which, as you know, wasn't working. So what we've done since we came in, and it was up to the now opposition, then government, they could have done everything that we've done. They just didn't do it. But what we've set up is a fraud fusion task force.
Order.
We are investing. Oh my Lord! Just don't say too much, Member Deakin, before you show us what you don't know. We set up the fraud fusion task force. It's $126 million. That wasn't there when we came to government. We've now got 19 different government agencies talking to each other. What Mr Dardo has discovered, and this all was set up under the somnolent, sleepy, incompetent, negligent gaze of those opposite when they were running the NDIS. Oh, Darren, I know you secretly agree with me. Under their somnolent gaze, they never tackled all of the agencies talking to each other.
We'll refer to members by the correct title.
Do you know, these people were the NDIS rorter's best friend, and they just never knew it. I'll give them that credit. I don't say it was deliberate. I say it was just genuinely incompetent, OK? In a theory between a conspiracy and a stuff-up, these people are the stuff-up, not the conspiracy on the fraud. But what we did do is set up our fraud fusion task force, $126 million. That's a good idea. Why didn't you have it? We've got all the agencies talking to each other. That's a good idea. Why didn't you have it? We've put extra people in the investigation teams. That's a good idea. Don't know why you didn't do that. We had the Quality and Safeguards Commission, Plural Quality and Safeguards Commission. For those of you who aren't students of history, we called for a Disability Royal Commission in 2017. The former Prime Minister, Mr Turnbull, panicked and he said, oh, we can't have a Royal Commission. That didn't work so well for him. And then instead we'll set up a Quality and Safeguards Commission, which opened its doors on the 1st of January 2018. The problem is they only put 350 people into it, 350 people, and then what happened is they weren't able to do their job properly. So what we've seen since we've came in, on top of our Fraud Fusion Task Force, on top of our extra investigators, on top of the range of other measures I've already outlined, changing the payment system so we scrutinise them, that's a revolutionary idea, is that we've now doubled the staff in the Safeguards Commission. Doubled the staff in the Safeguards Commission. So another couple of fun facts which the amnesiacs opposite me seem to forget is that when I became the minister, there was $231 million of NDIS payments under scrutiny. There's now several billion. When I came in, they had 41 investigations underway. There's now 220. There's now 510 compliance actions underway. We've got 20 matters in court. We've got another 12 matters with the DPP waiting to be progressed to court.
The time for debate has expired.
That's a shame.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. I'll put the question. Those opinions say aye. Aye. Against no. No. I think the noes have it. The ayes have it. Ring the bells for 4 minutes.
Bill's misled the House.
Order. The Manager of Opposition Business and the Minister for the NDIS. I'm quite enjoying the conversation, but I don't need to hear it on the floor of the Parliament. Lock the doors. The question before the House is the motion moved by the Manager of Opposition to be agreed to. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair and the noes to the left. I appoint the honourable members for Parkes and Gray as tellers for the ayes and the honourable members for Werriwa and Bean as tellers for the noes. Order. The result of the division is ayes 52, noes 70. The matter is resolved in the negative. Members can return to their seats or leave the chamber as quickly and as quietly as possible. We shall move to the matter of public importance. Members can just resume their seats as quickly as possible. We shall move to the MPI.